Chapter 8. At the Gate. During Noho's final year at high school, his cousin Takashi came from Osaka on a visit. Takashi was now helping his father in the wholesale drapery business. "It's no fun being a salesman. You have to work twice as long as an office worker and kowtow to everyone," he said. But even as he said it, Takashi did not look as if it were as bad as all that. It was a time of general depression following the Sino-Japanese War. So what he said was not without justification, but with his characteristic optimism, he showed no sign of feeling it very deeply. Nobuo envied him. "Nobuo, you're beginning to look quite handsome." Takashi slapped a large hand on Nobuo's shoulder. "Machiko is quite a beauty too," he went on tactfully, but she replied primely, "I don't want to be flattered, cousin Takashi." She knew that it was Nobuo who had the greater share of their mother's good looks. After a welcome dinner given for him, Takashi persuaded Nobuo to go downtown with him to see the lights. "Nobuo, you've graduated, I suppose?" "Yes." "Well, today, to celebrate your leaving school, I'm going to take you somewhere really good." Takashi led the way, walking rapidly, but sometimes he had to stop. "Tokyo's changed, I don't know where I am." He turned and faced Nobuo, lowering his voice unconsciously. "Have you ever had fun with a girl?" "Fun with a girl?" At first, Nobuo did not understand. "Well then, have you ever been down to the Yoshiwara and had fun?" When he heard the word Yoshiwara, Nobuo blushed scarlet. He was overcome with such a rush of feeling that he did not know what to reply. "What's up?" At the sight of Nobuo, Takashi roared with laughter. He was 30, with a wife and children. "Anyway, it's an experience a man has to have for the first time sooner or later, and tonight I'm treating you. Celebrate your graduation." Nobuo stopped and took 2 or 3 steps backward. He had heard about the Yoshiwara and knew what it stood for. He imagined that there must be hundreds of women there, more beautiful than he had ever seen. And as for having fun with one, Nobuo knew from his school friends what that meant. It would not be true to say that he did not want to go, yet within him there was a feeling of reluctance. Somehow, it was a place Nobuo was afraid of. He was like a child, torn with curiosity to have a look inside a haunted house, and yet, at the same time, afraid. As far as Nobuo was concerned, women were a closed book. The fact that there were only 2 sexes, men and women, filled him with amazement. His mother, she certainly was a woman, and Machiko too was now an unsophisticated young woman of 16. Even with these 2 blood relations with whom he lived, waking and sleeping under the same roof, he sometimes felt ill at ease. Sometimes when Machiko came close to him, he would suddenly become confused and shift away from her. Why he felt this aversion to her when she was his sister, he did not know. Afterwards, he often had feelings akin to love towards her, which he could not express. There was no reason in it. One minute he would feel antagonistic, and the next loving. So Nobuo was afraid of women who could awaken such feelings in him. One night he had a dream in which a strange woman appeared in a place he did not know. Since then, he had not been able to forget her. The general impression had been rather vague, but he was strongly aware that it was a woman, and it unnerved him to think about it. Sometimes, even when he was talking to his friends at school, his feelings about her would suddenly well up, and he would blush scarlet right down to his neck, much to his friends' surprise. One evening he had seen a woman riding in a rickshaw, leaning forward in a charming attitude, and Nobuo felt that her warmth had passed directly to his own body. That night he could not escape from his mental image of her. Nobuo was strong-willed and did not wish to be swayed by his emotions, but once this thing had started, there was no breaking free from it. The fact that a woman could completely rob him of his freedom filled him with fear and a sense of mystery, yet in spite of it, he felt a longing for the very thing which was such a trouble to him. In those days, before becoming a soldier, it was the accepted custom that a man should have had sexual experience of women. More than half Nobuo's school contemporaries had proudly boasted about their own. That Takashi should be leading Nobuo to take this step in life would not have been considered either remarkable or immoral. "What's up? Are you scared?" said Takashi, giving him a push in the back. Nobuo started walking again, trying to control his rapid breathing. He neither saw the street nor the people walking by. He felt himself getting tenser and taking many deep breaths. Nobuo, women aren't anything to be scared of. Once you get to know them, there's no problem. As he said this, Takashi himself grew excited at the thought of pleasures ahead, and his voice grew even louder than before. As he walked, for no apparent reason, Nobuo remembered Yoshikawa. I wonder if Yoshikawa has had anything to do with women yet, he thought. Memories of Yoshikawa's face flashed into his mind, the face of a 10-year-old, of the time when they parted, but it looked very adult and full of deep wisdom. Yoshikawa wouldn't play around with women, he thought, recalling his friend's letters in which he told of his regular visits to the Buddhist temple. Yoshikawa, in Hokkaido, working on the mining railway to support his mother and Fujiko, and going to hear the priest's teaching, would have neither opportunity nor inclination to go after the girls, he believed. Yet I'm doing what he wouldn't do. Nobuo considered going home by himself, but his feet followed Takashi as before. Why can't I turn round and go home? Even though he wanted to, he was not able to stop. Sensing the gaiety of Yoshiwara, which he had not yet seen, he walked on, musing, what sort of women are they, I wonder? What sort of things should I talk about? Imagining one thing after another, Nobuo silently kept up with Takashi. Look, Nobuo, see that big archway? Beyond that's the Yoshiwara. We're nearly there. When Nobuo looked in the direction of Takashi's pointing finger, his heart began to beat wildly. Then, after he had pulled himself together a little, he began to notice numbers of men riding in rickshaws, dressed in fashionable clothes, overtaking them with smiles of anticipation on their faces. 5 or 6 students were singing, "Even if I had 10,000 foes," waving their hands and shouting. Somehow their silhouettes seen in the dark shadows inside the arch left a sharp, burning impression in Nobuo's mind. There are lots of people going in, aren't there? Nobuo noticed that his own voice was wavering and strange. That's right, real men. Takashi threw the words back with a smile. Thinking of himself as one of this large crowd of men, Nobuo felt suddenly lonely. Where am I going? He suddenly began to hate himself. To get himself a woman would certainly not be considered bad, but neither was it a thing to be praised. In his heart, he was convinced that it was not good. If it were Yoshikawa, he would be ashamed to come to such a place. Looking at one of the bright pictures in the Yoshiwara from a distance, Nobuo still could not make up his mind to go back. The thought that the soft-skinned woman of his dreams could here become a reality was a persistent attraction. Hey, what are you doing? Act like a man! No sooner had Takashi said this than Nobuo came to himself with a start. That's right, he said to himself. I'm not behaving like a man at all. He made a tremendous effort of will. About turn! By the time he realized that he had turned round, he had broken into a run. He did not spare even a glance for Takashi shouting behind him, nor the scornful looks the people thronging in turned on him. Nobuo kept telling himself, keep going, again and again as he ran. At home and in bed, he pinched himself hard and repeatedly as a punishment for his weakness in being led as far as the entrance of the Yoshiwara. What if Yoshikawa had seen me, he thought. Yet the turmoil in his heart would not abate. He got up and switched on the light. He sat down at his desk and took out some writing paper, for he had to write and tell Yoshikawa. Maybe in the morning, when he reread the letter, he would tear it up, but he felt compelled to write something immediately. Dear Yoshikawa, it's 10 o'clock at night, and something has happened that I want to tell you about. Yoshikawa, human beings are not free, are they? Tonight, for the first time I came to know the painful fact that men are captives. Even in middle school, I prided myself that no one was my intellectual superior. I may be thin, but I have reached second standard at the judo hall. In fact, I confess I have always secretly prided myself that I was superior to most other people. Comparing myself with other young people, I thought I was more discerning and stronger-willed than they. So I used to apply the saying, man is the lord of creation, to myself without any qualms. When he reached this point, Nobuo wondered whether to go on. The question, should he or shouldn't he tell everything about his weakness to Yoshikawa, away in Hokkaido, knowing nothing, flitted into his mind. Yet Yoshikawa was not merely a friend. Nobuo always thought of him as walking one step ahead of him, or perhaps as living at one level higher than himself. And it was not just because he was far away. Nobuo started writing again. Dear Yoshikawa, I'm ashamed to write this. Tonight, I was on the way to the Yoshiwara, where the prostitutes are, and persuaded by my cousin, I went as far as the outskirts. But when I was nearly there, I turned round and ran home. It was because of you. When I thought that you would not go to a place like that, I suddenly felt ashamed. If you were not such a fine person, I would now be sharing a pillow with a prostitute. I want to thank you, Yoshikawa. Even though you are far away in Hokkaido, you saved me in a crisis. It's wonderful to have a good friend. If I hadn't known you, what an awful thing I might have done without even thinking. Yoshikawa, when I spoke about being a slave, I was speaking about my problem with women. If I discovered 100 yen, for instance, I would not pocket it myself. You could say I am free from the love of money. But if, for instance, a woman took hold of my hand in a place where there was no one to see me, I don't feel I could shake her off and go away. To put it bluntly, sexual desire is my biggest problem. Yoshikawa, in this area of life, I don't feel I'm a free man. Many times I have an uneasy feeling that sex is going to be my downfall. Please don't laugh at me. I wonder if you can teach me the way to freedom. This is a strange letter, but for me at 20, this is a great problem. Don't laugh, but help me, I beseech you, and reply as soon as you can. Today, when I saw the lights of Yoshiwara, I turned and ran back, but I could not trust myself to do the same again. Nobuo Nagano. P.S. Please burn this letter immediately. I would be very embarrassed if your mother or Fujiko should read it. When he had finished writing, Nobuo felt a little calmer. But as he wrote Fujiko's name, he could not help but recognize a feeling of love in his heart. 2 or 3 days after Takashi returned to Osaka, though it was still January, the sky had been clear since dawn, and the day was as warm as April. It's almost warm enough for cherry blossoms, said Kiku. Yes, but it's not healthy to be as warm as this, replied Masayuki. What's the matter, father? Are you ill? Machiko looked at Masayuki, her plait swinging in a white ribbon. My shoulders are stiff. Masayuki looked across to Machiko, now quite a young woman, and gave a faint smile. Nobuo wanted to say, "If you're not well, go to bed," but he kept silent. Those days he had many things to say, but checked them just as he was about to speak. After all, if it had no real importance, it was better left unsaid. He had begun to realize the emptiness of merely exchanging words with people. "Are you all right?" asked Kiku. "It's nothing much." Nobuo looked at his father as he changed into his suit. "You know, he really ought to go to bed," he wanted to say. Masayuki's face looked drawn, but Nobuo said nothing. He had no right to tell his father what to do, and his father had more sense than he had. Looking up at Nobuo, Masayuki said, "Your work for the examinations is going all right, isn't it? You look a bit tired. Don't wear yourself out." Nobuo blushed. It was sex that was getting him down, not his exams. He dreamily went to the gate to see his father off in a rickshaw. "I'm off now." Machiko, clutching her books, slipped past Nobuo. "Uh-huh." At Nobuo's absent-minded reply, Machiko turned back. The pleats of her skirt swayed softly. "Nobuo, why do you look like that on such a lovely day?" "What?" "Oh, it's nothing." "You can say that if you like, but both you and father don't seem well, and it makes me feel bad too." Machiko swung out of the gate without looking back. Nobuo ambled after her. Up till now, Machiko had always wanted to go with him wherever he went, but she did not seem to want to anymore. Even when they set off for their schools, which were in the same direction, Machiko always started a little before him. Nobuo stood at the gate and watched her now, striding energetically half a block away. The impression she gave, bright and fresh, without a care in the world, was pleasing to him, even if she was only his sister. Nobuo followed and had gone only a little way when he heard a man shouting wildly behind him. Looking round, he saw the regular rickshaw man who only minutes before had called for Masayuki. But he was not pulling the rickshaw now. Cold shivers ran down Nobuo's spine. Something had happened to his father. Gradually, the rickshaw man's words became intelligible. Nobuo hurried home as fast as he could, but his legs were trembling so that anybody would have thought him very slow. Masayuki had been unconscious in hospital for 6 hours and was snoring heavily. Kiku, Nobuo, and Machiko could only watch him in a fever of anxiety. Nobuo bitterly regretted that he had not urged his father to go to bed when he had seen his tired face that morning. "Why wasn't I able to say a single word?" he wondered, and bit his lip so hard that the blood began to run. "Father! Father!" Machiko cried out from time to time in a voice choked with tears. For Machiko, who had grown up without any real problems, this was unbearable. As might be expected, Kiku was the most composed of the three, but in that half-day her beautiful cheeks had become pinched and haggard. Nobuo unconsciously had both hands tightly clenched. What if father should die now, he thought. Even to think of it was unbearable. The only thing to do was to kneel down and pray something, as he had seen Machiko and his mother do with their hands together in an attitude of prayer. How he envied them. But secretly Nobuo believed that the god of Yaso would answer them. He kept thinking of his father and of the time when he had slapped him as a small boy. When Torao pushed me off the outhouse roof and I said, "No slum kid ever pushed me off the roof." Now he was 20, Nobuo understood his father's feelings. He did right to hit me, he thought. With Masayuki's unconscious form in front of him, he appreciated the value of what his father had said. "I need my father," he groaned. Perhaps it was only a desire to return to the past, but he longed that his father should live on. Even if he only slept, only breathed, so long as he could live, Nobuo would be grateful. But it was not to be, for Masayuki died that evening. Nobuo had never imagined that there could be a funeral other than a Buddhist one. To all the relatives, it was the only thing that could be done. So when Kiku suggested a Christian funeral, everyone suddenly became hostile and excited. "How can you do such a shameful thing?" Tosa's younger brother declared that if there was to be a Christian funeral, he would go home. "We know you're a Yaso, but that doesn't mean to say that you must go so far as to give Masayuki a Yaso funeral." All kinds of criticisms were leveled at Kiku. Most people had not approved of the way things had worked out over Tos. It had only been because of Masayuki's peace-loving nature and Kiku's kindness that their complaints had never been brought out into the open. For Kiku to suggest a Christian funeral, therefore, invited their hostility all the more. But when someone declared, "No, we can't send Masayuki off with such a funeral," Kiku produced a sealed letter for all to see. "These are my husband's last wishes," she said, and bowed politely. "Last wishes? When did my father write them?" Nobuo wondered in amazement. The paper was read by Tosa's younger brother. "All men must die, but no one can foretell the day of their death. In this letter there is nothing new that I want to write. Kiku knows everything I have requested. What I have said to Kiku, Nobuo, and Machiko in everyday conversation, and what I have done I wish you to think of as my legacy to you. With such a plan in mind I have lived each day. In the distress that comes with my death, may this note be a comfort to you. I wish you, Nobuo, as the eldest son of the Nagano family, to take care of your mother, guide your sister, and become a worthy head of the family. However, that does not mean that I want worldly success for you. Learn from your mother how men should live. Nobuo, I want you to think very seriously about the fact that you were born a human being and make special efforts to realize your humanity to the full. I consider myself fortunate to have lived as the husband of Kiku and the father of Nobuo and Machiko. All this has been given to me by God. You may have some financial problems after my death. Do not let this disturb you. Surely God will supply your needs. I wish to have a Christian funeral. Here I close. I have recently been feeling very tired. Just in case anything should happen, I have written this. Masayuki, January 14th, for Kiku, Nobuo, and Machiko. When the will had been heard, all present just nodded, and hardly anyone discussed it, even in a whisper. To them, a will was nothing more than a bequeathing of property. This will, without any such statements, left them at a loss. But there was one thing that was definite. No one could oppose the Christian funeral any more. After the funeral was over, the house seemed suddenly very lonely. Whenever Nobuo lay on his bed and closed his eyes, he sensed that the word death, written large, was pressing in on him. Both his grandmother's and his father's deaths had been sudden. They had been extreme cases, leaving no time for anything, no conversation, not even a last entreaty. If there could only have been 2 or 3 days taking care of them, and the ones dying had had a chance to speak to those being left, it might have been easier to bear the sadness. But his father and grandmother had lost consciousness immediately, and had died while they had all watched helplessly. It really isn't fair. Nobuo felt so resentful that he wanted to complain to someone about it. Maybe I'll die suddenly too, like grandmother and father. The thought frightened him. Shortly before his father's death, it had been the problem of sex that had occupied his thoughts. But now his biggest worry had become death. The problem of sex seemed to hold greater possibilities for discussion and solution. There was a way out, but death was an irrevocable, clean-cut loss of life, a predicament from which there was no escape. I don't know when or where or what the cause will be, but one thing is sure, I'm gonna die. Nobuo opened his eyes and stared hard at his two hands. Looking at his pale palms, he thought, these hands are alive, but one day they'll be completely cold, unable to move. Starting with his thumb, he bent his fingers one by one and then opened them again. At that moment, the sharp realization that all men have to die came starkly home to him. Why is it that I've never before realized so clearly that death, the end, is one of the most important facts of life? Nobuo thought highly of his father. Admittedly, when he had been alive, he had struck him as being too peaceful, and this sometimes irritated him. But then he had written in his will, "What I have said to Kiku, Nobuo, and Machiko in everyday conversation, and what I have done, I wish you to think of as my legacy to you." This was the attitude of a man who had come to be prepared for death at any time. During his peaceful day-to-day life, he had nevertheless wrestled with this great problem. Would I be able to live a model life every day like that so that it could speak like a will for me? His father's death grieved Nobuo, but it left another even more lasting impression on him. It was at the funeral that Nobuo first set foot in a Christian church. The slightly gloomy building, with its high ceiling, was not the suspicious place that Nobuo had imagined it to be. The people he met there were neither forbidding nor particularly strange, but a funeral without the chanting of sutras or burning of incense, just an organ playing hymns, seemed to Nobuo to be very unfeeling. He could not get used to the minister praying, and everyone, including himself, uniting in a hollow-sounding amen. But if my father and mother believe so deeply in this religion, it can't be too bad, he began to think. Even so, he could not imagine himself going there all his life. As a result of Masayuki's death, there was an immediate down-to-earth problem to be faced, whether or not Nobuo should go to university. As a banker, his father had had a good salary, and there would be enough for them to live on for the 2 or 3 years he was studying. But Nobuo did not think that as head of the family he should live off the family savings. Of course he longed to go to university, but he stubbornly concluded that he could get up to graduation standard by himself. As he took this step into manhood, he could be prouder of supporting his mother and sister than of a university education. Yoshikawa only went to junior school, but he supports his mother and sister, he reminded himself. Now that he realized what a big thing it was, he respected Yoshikawa even more. The day after the formal week of mourning for his father was over, Nobuo wrote to Yoshikawa. "Dear Yoshikawa, I suppose my other letter reached you. Recently, my father died very suddenly, a thing I never thought could happen. Yesterday was the 7th day of mourning, and to tell you the truth, I still cannot fully realize that it has happened. When I wake up in the morning, it's like the end of a long dream, and I feel that my father is still alive. Afterwards, the feeling of desolation is terrible. You have lost your father too, so I think you will understand. Father died of a stroke in no time at all. Man may be the Lord of creation, but I still wonder why people should have to die in such a miserable manner. My grandmother died of a stroke too, so when my father died suddenly of the same disease, I came to think of death as a sudden, awful surprise attack. Of course, I don't suppose anyone thinks of death without revulsion, but to be attacked without warning and struck down by a single blow is something unbearably frightening. I have been thinking a lot about death, and there are several questions that puzzle me about it. It's amazing, isn't it? You and I both had a father and mother and a sister, and we have both lost our fathers. I feel that your destiny and mine are similar. Even if it is just wishful thinking, I would like them to be the same. Anyway, even though you lost your father in junior school days, you are living a very worthwhile life now. I must try to do as well as you, my senior." This is not a very logical letter, but I just had to write one. Please forgive my previous strange letter and don't laugh at me, Nobuo. He had wanted to write, but now he felt he had written nothing worthwhile. He longed to speak to Yoshikawa, even if only a few words. Since entering high school, Nobuo had made many friends, but for some reason there was no one with whom he could have a heart-to-heart talk. Maybe it was because Yoshikawa, far away in Hokkaido, was the one to whom he could talk most easily. But then, if they met now, it was quite possible that even they would not be able to talk freely. Perhaps it was because he was unable to see Yoshikawa's face that Nobuo was deeply bound to him through letter writing. The day after Nobuo sent the letter off, another arrived from Yoshikawa. Under the illusion that it was a reply to his letter of the day before, Nobuo opened it joyfully. Just to look at the familiar rounded handwriting and widely spaced words was to be comforted. Dear Nobuo, I've read your letter over and over again. To tell you the truth, I did not think that you were the sort of person who could write such a letter. I'm sorry, that sounds a bit rude. But I have always looked upon you as being rather proper and reserved. I never thought you would write to me about your sex problems. But you know, I'm human too. Any way you look at it, I'm just an average person. Even though I go to hear the priests, in my heart I'm not in the least different from you, Nagano. But after reading your letter, I was relieved and felt a new respect for you. I've burned my fingers badly over sex too. But this is the worst of being human. We can't help it, can we? As human beings with many sufferings, we need the teaching of the Buddha. Have you read any religious books? It does not look as if you have yet. Losing my father early and having many hardships in life, I have found the priest's teaching to be a help and comfort. According to several sermons I have heard, men cannot live without making blunders, and I have increasingly come to realize that this is so. To do what we feel we ought to, and to refrain from doing what we feel we ought not to do, would be good, but it doesn't work. Just as you have written, men have no freedom. My sister Fujiko, with her crippled leg, is like this, and people think of her as disabled. It's easy to laugh at the physical cripple you can see, but it is harder to realize that in our hearts, we are all helpless cripples. Yet, even though that is so, it's good that we have been able to talk freely about sex. I think we ought to drink a big toast to that. I'm only sorry that the letter did not seem like your usual self. Talking about drinking, I have started to drink a little sake recently. The winters here are colder than you could ever imagine, and I've taken to having a glass now and again. But having had to put up with my father's drunken rages, I'm determined not to become a heavy drinker like him. As the old proverb says, a friend from afar is a great joy. When are you going to come to Hokkaido so that I can meet you and we can have a drink together? Whatever you say, you are really fortunate, having both your parents and getting ready for university. I pray that good fortune will accompany you throughout your life. Even though I say this, it doesn't mean that I consider myself unfortunate. My father's drunkenness and early death, and the fact that I could only go to junior school, by and large I think of as trials that fate has apportioned to me. If you once succumb to self-pity, there's no end to it. As soon as you enter university, do write to me. Osamu Yoshikawa. P.S. That little terror Fujiko has grown up so rapidly. She even looks quite pretty. The relationship with one's sister is a funny thing, isn't it? Though they are women and the opposite sex, they don't seem like that to me. This brother-sister relationship, no one without an elder or younger sister could understand it. Could they? When Nobuo had read the letter through, he heaved a sigh of relief. Yoshikawa doesn't know about my father's death yet, he murmured to himself as he read it again. Yoshikawa lost his father a long time ago. Nobuo now realized the significance of the life Yoshikawa had been living for years. The feelings he had had when he wrote about his sex problems now struck him as a luxury. Yoshikawa had neither envied Nobuo's good fortune nor resented it, but had always written cheerfully, as if he himself were blessed with good fortune. And now I have no father. Nobuo began to weep, but his tears were not for his father's death. They were tears of gratitude for Yoshikawa, who, though much less fortunate, had by his wonderful spirit been a constant inspiration to Nobuo. One thing is certain, I'm not unfortunate either. Being unable to go to university is no misfortune at all. In those days, education began at 7.